Welcome everyone, this is On Just Restart, and this time we're talking about Nintendo's big plan for the Metroid series. So the reason we're talking about this today is because we just got updated sales numbers for Nintendo's Switch hardware and software sales leading up to the end of 2021, which includes the months of October, November, and December of 2021, which interestingly includes Metroid Dread sales because Metroid Dread came out in the beginning of October, and we have some pretty darn good news about these sales, and I think these sales do have pretty strong implications for the future of the Metroid series in conjunction with other things we've discussed or have heard in the past. So, today we're going to be focusing on Nintendo's overall plan for the Metroid series, what games will be coming, when will they be coming, and how they will be handling it all. Now before we jump into things, let me first very quickly talk about my social media. You may see a few different things here on screen, you can check that all out, it is linked in the description below, and of course, if you like what you're seeing here, you can subscribe, or perhaps even consider joining as a member. So let's get into the meat and potatoes here. Nintendo sales are continually thriving. Things have been going very well, very strong. The Nintendo Switch, as of December 2021, as of the end of December 2021, is well over 100 million units sold already. 103.54 million, with software sales at 766.41 million. We're talking about more than a 1 to 7 ratio here, 1 to 7.5 about ratio of hardware to games actually purchased for Nintendo Switch owners. That's an incredible ratio, and we're not even 5 whole years into the system's life cycle, which is also pretty impressive. The Switch is averaging more than 20 million units sold per year. We will not be at the 5-year anniversary until March of 2022, and we won't know about the actual sales until a little bit afterwards. For example, this is the beginning of February, and we're not learning about the total 2021 sales until now. So expect something similar when it comes to the numbers when we get to the end of the fiscal year, which will be around March of 2022. And it's been a really healthy environment for software sales. As we already noted, a lot of games are seeing record-breaking sales on this system. Super Mario, Legend of Zelda, Mario Kart, Smash Bros., Animal Crossing, Xenoblade, Fire Emblem, Luigi's Mansion, Pokemon, all of these big Nintendo franchises. I didn't even mention them all, and there are also strong third-party sales as well, but basically, there are so many series that are seeing their series best on Nintendo Switch, and Metroid is looking to be no different. Metroid Dread is coming in with less than 3 months being out on the market at 2.74 million units sold. For comparison, Skyward Sword HD, a big Zelda game, it came out a few months before Metroid Dread, had a bit of a head start there, and it's around 3.8 million. So Metroid Dread is just about 1 million behind a Zelda game which has been out on the market for a few extra months. Now I'm not trying to say that Metroid Dread lifetime will outsell Skyward Sword HD, it's possible, but really what I'm getting at here is that Metroid is now entering a tier that it has not been in before. And this is very, very promising for the future of the series, but it's also what I think Nintendo has intended for a while. Now, Metroid, historically speaking, has not really performed from a sales perspective. When you take a look at its critical acclaim and you look at its sales numbers, there is quite a drop-off there. It doesn't quite match up, that the ratio just isn't very good. From a critical perspective, the Metroid series is one of the greatest series of all time. With games like Metroid, Super Metroid, Metroid Fusion, Metroid Prime, some of the greatest games ever made come from the Metroid franchise. Yet, the sales do not suggest so. The best-selling game in the Metroid franchise currently is Metroid Prime, hovering around 2.8 something million. And if you remember what I just mentioned earlier, Metroid Dread is right behind it. And this is awesome. And this is very telling because, again, Metroid Prime has been out since 2002. Metroid Dread has been out since October 2021, and these numbers are only accounting for less than 3 months of being out on the market. So Metroid Dread is already on the very cusp of being the best-selling Metroid game of all time, and that is exciting as a Metroid fan because while I want to see the series succeed, And on that note, Metroid Dread has been getting its praise. Strong reviews, lots of Game Awards nominations, and actual Game of the Year awards for different shows and presentations. Like, it's doing pretty darn good. It's getting the respect I think it deserves, and now we're seeing the sales numbers also reflect that as well. And again, this is really good news, not just because Metroid Dread is an amazing game and it's getting the respect it deserves, but it's also promising for the future of the series. And like I also mentioned earlier, this is what Nintendo wanted. So Metroid has suffered sales-wise, as I mentioned before, and we've seen some pretty big droughts. The early 2000s actually had quite a few Metroid games come out in a short period of time. Metroid Prime, Metroid Fusion, Metroid Zero Mission, Metroid Prime Trilogy, Prime 2, Prime 3, Metroid Other M, Metroid Pinball. There was a lot that came out in a relatively short amount of time. About 8 years, we saw like 9 or 10 Metroid games around there. I have to double check the numbers, but I'm ballparking. But we're really close. Oh, there was also, how could I forget Metroid Prime Hunters? There was a lot of Metroid games that came out during that period is the point I'm making here. And none of those games really performed as well as Metroid Dread, save for Metroid Prime, which was the first one of all of those games. And now Metroid Dread's about to surpass it. But since Other M, there weren't any major Metroid games until Federation Force in 2015. There was quite a gap there, and that was a chibi-style spin-off Metroid game, not a mainline entry for the series on a home console. There was quite a difference there in terms of what fans have come to expect for the Metroid series, especially considering that there was such a large gap that we had to wait between one Metroid game and another. So there was backlash there, but it was also indicative of a couple things. One, Nintendo probably didn't want to go all in on a Metroid game for the Wii U, a failing system, but also two, Nintendo isn't just going to rush into another Metroid game when it's not seeing the sales that it probably deserves, and it may not be worth the effort or the investment when they could focus on something else that was more likely to have a strong return. So people have been making this argument that we probably won't be getting a lot of Metroid games because Metroid just doesn't sell well, and that's logical. But let's take a look at other series like Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and Fire Emblem Three Houses. Those games are now the best-selling games in their respective series, are really close, and the sales for those games are ranged between 2 to 3 million, yet those series see fairly consistent releases. What that suggests is that if a Nintendo franchise can get to the 2 to 3 million mark consistently, Nintendo is more likely to come out with them consistently. And where's Metroid Dread? Somewhere in that 2 to 3 million mark, and it's only been out for less than 3 months, at least according to the recorded sales numbers. In other words, Nintendo is probably going to continue pushing things, and we've seen evidence of this. Firstly, simply with what Nintendo did with Metroid Dread, they made sure to push this game. They made sure that they were going to get that 2.74 million during the holidays and be really close to 3 million and probably surpassing that mark really soon and being the best-selling Metroid game ever. They made it a big focus at their E3. Metroid Dread was a part of 2 Nintendo Treehouses. It had its own developer diary. It was a big reveal of the show. Metroid Dread was pushed alongside Switch OLED, and it was all a part of their big marketing. It was the big game Nintendo really had that was getting nominations and awards and such at the different Game Awards shows throughout the holidays. And there's been a lot of commercials and advertisements and mentioned on social media and blog posts and such. Nintendo's been pushing Metroid pretty much as hard as they ever have, and that marketing conjunction with quality game and the healthy ecosystem of the Switch, and I would say good taste of Switch owners and also social media, which is probably the best way of word of mouth nowadays, all of that has combined to strong Metroid Dread sales. But now actually to the point. Because of these strong sales, and because Nintendo's been pushing Metroid, it is evidence that Nintendo has had a plan, and they're probably going to continue their plan to come out with more Metroid games in the not-so-distant future. So for a very long time, Metroid Prime Trilogy has been rumored. It's been coming from a lot of different places, but as the years have progressed, and as Metroid Prime 4 was restarted in development, the thinking sort of changed to, well, the game was probably held off, or the games were held off until Prime 4 was closer to release. And now, we're so late to Switch's life cycle, perhaps we're getting close to that time where Prime 4 could start to be discussed. We just passed the 3-year anniversary of the restart not so long ago, a few days ago. So the game likely is very far along and probably could be shown off potentially this year if Nintendo wants to. I'm not saying it's coming out this year, but Nintendo could tease it this year potentially. Basically, there are Metroid games that we already know about that are on the horizon. Now, specifically with Metroid Prime Trilogy, lately we've been hearing that perhaps that's not exactly what's coming. We're not entirely sure why. Perhaps we just got more information that clarified what it actually is. Perhaps those plans changed. Perhaps they were conflated and we are still getting Prime 2 and 3 later down the road. But right now, what we're hearing from a number of journalists and leakers, if you want to call them that have a pretty good track record here, such as Emily Rogers, Nate the Hate, Jeff Grubb. These people are saying that Metroid Prime is getting remastered. It's been in development for years, potentially since 2018 or so, and it's coming out for Metroid Prime's 20th anniversary this year. It makes sense. Considering how hard Nintendo pushed Metroid Dread, considering how once upon a time Nintendo had near annual Metroid releases, and considering how now on the Switch it is a perfect opportunity to re-establish a franchise and acquire a larger new audience that will be consistent, it makes sense for Nintendo to push this franchise. And now with Metroid Dread, we're seeing the fruits of those efforts. Metroid Dread has established itself, at the very least, in a tier of the likes of Xenoblade Chronicles and Fire Emblem. But considering that we're only at the beginning here, and there are other games potentially on the horizon, Metroid Dread could go beyond this. I mentioned earlier how Metroid Prime currently is the best-selling game in the series. What better way to follow up Metroid Dread, which is now destined to become, at least for a short amount of time, the best-selling Metroid game in the series yet, with the initial best-selling game of the entire series, Metroid Prime, with a wonderful remaster that's been in development for years. If it's been in development for years, that suggests this is more than just a Skyward Sword HD. This is going to get repurposed quite a bit, with some nice quality of life updates, and some pretty hefty visual improvements. That's the suggestion by it being developed for so long, we don't know, but I feel pretty good about that assumption. If this game comes out in the second half of the year, say September or October, somewhere between August and October I would say, and it also has a big push similar to Metroid Dread, or somewhat of a bigger push, and it also performs really well, that's also going to strengthen the brand of Metroid. And if we are in a situation where we have two games in back-to-back years that perform really, really well, why can't Nintendo do that again? And Metroid Prime 4 has been in development for quite some time already. Could it be ready for a 2023 release? I think so. If they started development at the beginning of 2019, which is when they announced the restart, although you could argue they probably would have started a little bit before then, so perhaps late 2018, it could probably come out by the end of 2023. Granted, COVID certainly would have delayed things, and we don't know if there was anything recycled from the initial development, at least some storyboarding and ideas, I'd have to imagine, from Kensuke Tanabe, the Prime producer. But either way, even if they started exactly at 2019, which I don't think they did, that's still a pretty hefty development cycle. We're talking about almost 5 years if it's coming out at the end of 2023. So the game could be ready, and we could be in a situation where we get Metroid Dread in 2021, Prime Remake in 2022, and Prime 4, the game we've been waiting for since the first year of the Nintendo Switch. It's been hyped and discussed and speculated on for so long. If those games come out in that succession, I think we're being in a scenario where the Metroid franchise is going to be going very, very strong, with consistent, strong-selling games, perhaps beyond the likes of Fire Emblem or Xenoblade, perhaps approaching something closer to Zelda. I'm not saying we're going to be seeing 20+ million selling games here, but maybe 5 to 10 million, that could be pretty good. And what that's going to mean is that we could be looking at a scenario similar to the early 2000s, not in terms of sales, but in terms of consistency of release. We could be seeing Metroid games come out every year or every other year, and that's going to be a beautiful, wonderful thing to see as a Metroid fan. And I think there's a lot of suggestion of that based off what we're seeing so far for Metroid Dread, and what we're hearing for both Metroid Prime Remake and Metroid Prime 4. But what do you guys make of this potential plan Nintendo may have to make the Metroid brand stronger than it ever has been? Let me know in the comments below. Anyways, everyone, this is On Just Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.